Hi, welcome, Layla. Thank you so much for being on my podcast today.
I'm so excited to be here, Leslie.
Yeah. So, as you know, we start at the beginning, which is when you were growing up, what do you remember about how you were raised, either in religion or with spirituality, or how you felt or thought about that growing up?
Okay, I grew up Muslim, and what I remember the most about it is my mother. So I grew up in the UK, and it's really funny. I went to Catholic schools almost my entire childhood until I moved here to the Middle East. So I went to Roman Catholic schools. We went to Mass each week. I knew all the hymns. And it's really interesting. I found a tape that my mom had recorded of me when I was about 3 years old. And in the tape, I keep singing this song, Welcome Baby Jesus, and just humming it to myself while playing, while reading my book. And my mom says I used to just love singing that song because we used to sing it at school. And she said I would come home and tell them we have to say grace before we eat. We need to say prayers. And I would tell her, I'm a Christian. And she said it was really hard for her. But at the same time, they really wanted me and my brothers to go to Catholic schools because the level of education was a lot better. So she had to work really hard to create an environment that was Islamic outside of school, while helping us to not feel like the odd ones out. And it was very much her job because my dad worked at sea. So he would be away for months and months at a time. He would be gone 6 months at a time, sometimes more. So it was her at home creating this environment for us, teaching us about Islam, buying us these books, teaching us how to read the Quran. And at the same time, when it was Christmas time, she would still buy us Christmas gifts because she didn't want us to feel left out when we went into school and everyone said, "What did you get for Christmas?" And we were the only ones who didn't get anything. So yeah.
I have a couple of questions. It's a really interesting. So was it hidden? Were you told to not talk about it when you went to school?
No.
Was it just, so I was raised with two dads. My parents got divorced and my mom remarried when I was young. And I just thought it was normal. Like I remember finding out someone else didn't have two dads. Like I felt bad for them. Right. Like, and so it wasn't a thing. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious how that was held for you. Like, it sounds like she didn't say it was bad for you to sing those songs or to do that experience.
The only thing that she told us was don't go up to receive communion. When you go to Mass, just don't go up to receive communion. You can go to the Mass, you can sing the hymns, you can do all those things, but don't go up to receive communion because that's not our religion. And so it's strange because I was always very aware that I was different because I was always the only one sat there in the seat, in the pew while everyone else was going up, right? And that was always a very uncomfortable moment for me. Mm-hmm. I would be dreading it when it was coming and then eager for everyone to just sit down and so we could move on to the next bit.
Yeah.
Because, I was also one of the only few kids of color as well. So it was awkward. It was uncomfortable for me. But in terms of how my mother spoke to us about it, she just made it really clear, look, this is our religion. This is our culture. This is how we worship. She would speak to us in her mother tongue at home as well, in both Swahili and in English, so that we were surrounded by that as well. And so as I was growing up, I was definitely aware that we were different. But not that was bad or good. We were just different.
I think as a mother, yeah. I can it sounds so skillful, right? Like I can see the complexities of doing that. And I want to honor like how much work that would take and how, it sounds like she did it really masterfully.
Yeah, I think she, it's really odd. I didn't think about how weird it was that she specifically sent us to Catholic schools until I was a lot older, because she could have just not. She could have just sent us to regular school and we wouldn't have had those experiences. But for her and for my dad, it was really important for us to have that higher level of quality of education.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just had this plan, it seemed like, of how to surround us with Islam at home.
Mm-hmm.
So that we knew what our identity was, we knew what our religion was. But it was only when I was 15 years old and we moved here to Qatar in the Middle East that I was, first of all, no longer in a Catholic school. I was just in an international expatriate school. We don't study religion, really, unless you're doing it as an extracurricular activity, in which case it would be Islam that you'd be studying, right? And I was no longer the only Black girl or Muslim.
Wow.
And so suddenly I became the norm. It was normal to be Muslim. And that was, it was like a weird culture shift for me, but very, 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 very cool. And so it's interesting because my kids are now growing up here. They go to the same school that I graduated from. And yeah, they're having a completely different experience than the one that I had growing up.
So there's a couple points there I'm really curious about. One, which is, some people really talk about their the faith that they were raised with, both like it's a cultural thing, right? But some people don't feel fulfilled spiritually by that. And I'm curious if you did growing up. Like, did you feel connected to it other than, yes, there's two pieces, right? The cultural identity and then the spiritual feeding. And how was that for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I ever, it was never entertained in my mind that there was another option, right? So that's who we are. That's what we're surrounded with. There is no other option. This is it. And not in a bad way. It was just like, that's who we are. That's what our path is. And I never felt like I don't want to be on this path, or this doesn't resonate with me, or I don't want to be here. But definitely as an adult and in more recent years, I began to look at different types of spirituality, definitely began to look more at the mystical side, or the mystical messages, or the deeper spiritual messages beyond just we pray 5 times a day, we fast once a year, beyond those actions, like what's going on at a deeper level. And that's kind of where I'm at now, where I have my religion, and I'll still say,
Are you back?
I'm back. I'm here. I wasn't sure if I was gone. I was talking.
Yeah. So you said that you had your religion and you did your prayers, but that it started to be something deeper for you.
Yeah, I started to look more and just kind of getting this internal tug, this internal yearning for something deeper, for a more personal connection. And that kind of coincided with many different things, but it led me to exploring, first of all, goddess-based spirituality and what that was about. It led me to explore feminist spirituality and exploring the priestess path. And from each thing, my kind of my guiding light has been, you can look at all of these things and you just take what feels right and good for you. Right? And because for so long, I was afraid that if I allowed myself to look at those different paths, that I would then sort of lose my way or lose my religion. And it was only when I gave myself permission to say, look, you can look at all of these different things. You don't just have to believe it just because you read it, right?
Yeah.
allow yourself to explore and then take what works for you, what feels right for you in your heart, and then just leave the rest. And that gave me so much freedom to play with so many different ideas and explore different practices. And I actually feel much more grounded as a Muslim, having given myself that permission.
Oh, amen. I think, we had talked earlier, and I wasn't raised with a religion, but I think that a lot of people who are part of that religion can be a little fear-based, a lot of religions. And it's kind of like, this is what we do. Don't look outside of here, right? Like there's some kind of really negative thing to happen if you explore. And I love the fact that in your exploring, you actually feel deeper. I mean, is this what you're saying? Deeper in your own religion?
Yes, because I was able to start seeing what is religion and what is patriarchal conditioning and cultural conditioning.
All right, let's here, man. Let's go. I love that. Okay, so what is it? What is it for you? What did you find?
I found that many of the things that outwardly may look at, we have to do this, we have to do that. Oftentimes when it feels, for me anyway, I'm always speaking personally from my own experience, when it feels like it's a should and not an invitation, that there's something about that doesn't feel quite right. There's a saying in Islam that says there's no compulsion in religion, meaning, to me, that means anything that feels forced and feels like you're being made to do something that just doesn't feel right or sound right is just not true. And so there are things that I released as part of that journey. I used to wear the hijab since I was 15 years old. And one of the things that I released on that journey was the hijab. I stopped covering my hair. And that was an interesting journey in and of itself, because there were a lot of things going on in my mind around that. One of the major things, well, I had two major things. One being I didn't want to disappoint my parents. And the second being I didn't want non-Muslims to see that and believe that that was an act of empowerment, because Islam is like a patriarchal religion, and therefore I was freeing myself from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. So there was a lot of other people's stuff,
Oh, man, right? Like,
right?
I don't know I guess men feel that way, but I mean, women are so focused in that arena, and I am, and how to keep what I hear you saying, and I think is so hard in the work for me today, is how do I look internally? What is my experience of this? What is my truth?
Yeah.
And that's what I hear you saying, right?
Yeah, definitely. Because when I was able to tune in and ask that question, what is my truth, and have that my direct conversation with the divine around that, it was, you are loved and beloved and worthy, whether you're covered or not. It makes no difference, really. So the fear that I had around no longer wearing it had so much to do with how other people would perceive that, what other people would think of me if I did that, how other people might use that and make something of it. It had nothing to do with my personal, intimate relationship with the divine. And so it took me once I started getting the whispering of this is something that I want to do, it took me about 6 months to finally make that decision, because I needed to work through all of that fear. And I needed to make that decision knowing I fully owned it and wasn't playing into any of those thoughts. And, it is what it is, right? It's not like I'm on the other side and thinking, yes, now I'm free and liberated, right?
I've arrived, finally, the thing.
Right? It has nothing to do with that. And I really took the time to make sure that I understood for myself that I was already free and liberated, whether I wore it or not. And I didn't want to stop wearing it until I knew that and believed it and felt it in my body.
Yeah, I when I look at my own culture around me, what I see is a bunch of things that we do, actions we take, symbolism that we have with no understanding of why, no depth into it. And so for me and my family, and now I have a little one, this idea of like, why do we do this? Why do we have a Christmas tree? Why do we, like, and to question these things and to really feel into these ideas and then make a honest decision, right, about it, not a knee-jerk, screw you, you're doing this to me. But this is, and that's the thing that's so beautiful. I did a lot of searching for my own spiritual and religious path. And one of them, I love the Jewish religion. And so I spent some time in that place, and, they wear a covering. They can wear a covering. Women can wear a doily, or it's called something which I'm not remembering right now, on your head. And I had a friend who is Jewish, and she really was showing me her religion. And she said, it's to be humbled before God. And I was like, that is, yes. It just deeply resonated with me. And we were in San Francisco, and I was probably in my 20s. And she was taking me to her high holidays, and she said, do you want to wear it? And I am 5'10", blonde, right? Like I am a lot. And I put it on my head, and I was immediately terrified of what other people thought and how, like it was about that. Like, okay, am I willing to be humble, to be wrong, to just show, it did the job it was supposed to do. Right?
Yes.
And I was like, oh, okay, got it. And so I really love the fact that the idea of looking into these practices that are that you've been doing for so long, and choosing and checking internally, and do you want to do this? Do you not want to do this? And what a courageous act that is.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard.
Yeah, and I think that the courage is not in not wearing the hijab. The courage is in knowing what is true for you and living that despite what others may think of you, whatever that is. And that's why I stand so firmly in support of my Muslim sisters who do choose to wear the hijab, and it is very meaningful to them. And it is a huge part of their identity. Like, I stand in such solidarity with them to be able to do that, because I want that for all of us, that we should all have the choice to be able to live our lives in the way that feels most resonant and most empowering for us.
Absolutely. Yes. That's the message, right? There you go.
Yeah.
So there's one other thing I wanted to touch on, and we've jumped up forward, but I want to hear about the experience of your move out of the UK, right? And into a mostly Muslim, like from being a minority to not being a minority. It just sounds like such an incredible life-changing experience. I don't know, right? I had never had that experience. So what was that like for you? And did you feel more freedom? And I mean, just like, what was it like for you?
It was really incredible. There were a few things that were really notable for me. So like I said, I grew up in the UK, and I was often one of the handful of kids who were not white. I was definitely always the Muslim kid, and the only Muslim kid in the Roman Catholic schools. And I remember just before we left, I think I was in year 10, and we were doing GCSEs at that point, and we had to do religious studies. We had to study I think we're studying Mark's Gospel or something. And at that point, I was reading a lot around religion, and I would be arguing with my teacher every time we had the lesson. And it was just very, I was starting to just not feel comfortable in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So when we came here, like I said, it was the first time that I was not a racial minority. It was the first time I was not a religious minority.
Mm-hmm.
And we no longer had to study those subjects. And so it was very interesting because even at home when I was in the UK, you know, my family were also the only Muslims that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So to be able to suddenly have friends who are Muslims, and, you know, you go in the mall and everyone's Muslim, you walk down the street and everyone's Muslim, and there's mosques everywhere. And the call to prayer is on the loudspeaker 5 times a day.
Mm.
Right. You know, you're in a Muslim country. Right.
Yeah.
And so that was really, it felt strange at first, but it also felt like coming home, but coming home to something I'd never known was missing.
Yes.
Because I had nothing to relate it to. And then the other thing that was really interesting was because my mom had done such a great job of creating this Islamic environment for us, making sure that we understood, you know, we don't drink, we pray 5 times a day, we fast. So we were like really like adherent to our religion.
Oh.
And we came here and our friends were a lot laid back.
Because they didn't have to fight for it.
They didn't have to. So the prayer, you know, the call to prayer, we go, like, we have to go pray. And they were like, really, you pray?
Interesting.
And so that was interesting because, you know, they, like you said, they didn't have to work for it. You know, it was just a given. It was much more cultural for them, whereas for us, it was much more about religion. And so that was just really interesting for us. What else? I think just being able to see different types of Muslims as well, right? Being able to see that truly Muslims come in all, you know, shapes and colors.
Of course.
And that it's normal. There's nothing odd or strange about it. To suddenly go from being the odd one out to it just being normal, was very, it just felt good. It felt like relief, I would say.
I bet. And so I guess, I mean, this can go from both topics, which is I'm curious how, because you have children, how are you differing in how you are raising them? Right. So they're growing up in that culture and they've never had the UK experience. And then you have expanded your spirituality, right? And so how has that altered how you're raising your children?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think, again, because we are living here, they are kind of, Islam is like osmosis, like it's happening with osmosis, like they're seeing it everywhere. A lot of the things they're seeing, it's just a normal part of life. And at the same time, you know, my daughter is now 7. They study Islamic studies at school as an option that they have. She goes to a British school, but they have the option for the Muslim students that they can go to Islamic studies. And so she's able to do that, which I never did in a school setting. I did it only at home. And we're also looking for a Quran teacher for her at the minute as well. And it's important for me that there's someone who can speak English really well, and is able to kind of understand where she's coming from. And so it is interesting. And I think a lot of my, you know, the things that I have been expanding into, I think they're still a bit young for me to talk about those things. And I feel like I'm still exploring as well. So for myself, I'm still looking for language around how I'm exploring kind of mysticism. One of the things that I'm really looking at this year is reading a lot of books around Sufism.
Mm.
And just because it's able to offer the kind of, I really love poetry, and
Mm.
it's able to offer the kind of languaging that really lands deeply in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from that place that I want to be able to talk to my children about faith and spirituality, and not just these are the tick box things that we do, And at the same time, what I really value about Islam is that at its core, it's about both things. It's about both, we talk about divine masculine, divine feminine.
Mm.
It's about both the structure and the routines and the practices and the rituals. And it's about this, the unseen and the mystery and what is beyond the veil that it is, we just don't have the human words to explain. And I think having gone through the journey that I've been on, it's been able to give me that language to be able to understand that my religion is both of those things. I don't think I really understood that before. I think I was very much, I understood very much the kind of structure and the rules and the rituals, but wasn't really taught the mystery side of it.
Mm.
So that's what I'm exploring.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just our culture today that we have now opened that arena. I mean, that's really the land in which I live in, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
And it's that balance. It's so tempting to just be like, oh, mysticism and like floaty and whatever, right? Like, and then it's also this new deep, no, you have to pay your bills, show up. And there is
Right.
a really powerful, important reason I get on my knees to pray.
Yes.
Right. And there is something to me physically surrendering all the way down that also feeds my soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that I'm a human being and I am spiritual, and the interplay of those two is the rough, right? Like that's the rub, right?
Mm-hmm.
I often say it'd be so much easier to just sit on a mountaintop and pray and not be married or, have children or whatever. Like that part's the hard part, how to be holy and honoring when things are hard. So yeah, I had this, I told you about this earlier. One of the other podcasts I did is with India, Ocean Denton, and she had really talked about Indigo. Sorry. She had really talked about the idea of the transmission of how we story things, right? Here's the event, and how we talk about the event really gives a lot of information. Does that make sense? Like,
yes.
And that's where a lot of our biases and our ideas come from. Like, how do we hold these? I just went on a trip, and I was in San Francisco, and there's a lot going on, and there's all these people, and I, like a needle in a haystack, ran into a client of mine who I love deeply and who I couldn't have designed it if I wanted to. And for me, it was holy. It was like a wink and a nod and this like beautiful moment where I got to connect with someone who I love deeply. And instead of just being like, oh, what a coincidence, like there's a different hold. That's not how I hold it. Like I really hold it as like a spark for her, a spark for me. And it was perfectly aligned. Yeah. So I think that
I love that. Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was going to say what I'm hearing from that is this like deep reverence for life and this understanding of below the like physical coincidences, how so much is orchestrated by the divine, and having a deep appreciation for that.
Yeah. And also I think that what got sparked for me is you are teaching your children your path automatically by living it, right? Like so much of our teaching to our children is just that what they witness us doing.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and with my daughter, she, you know, she comes in my office. I have like tarot decks and stuff. Like she's just like, what are these? I'm like, they're cards, you know, that's it. And we'll talk about intuition. And she has like, I have crystals, and I've given her some, and she sleeps with them, and she uses them. And so it's not like this is like a thing that we're making a big deal out of. It's just wanting to have this relationship with life where everything feels magical, where everything feels like it's a conversation with God. You know, that's where I'm trying to get to. And I think that's probably going to be my lifelong trying to get to. I think that's what we're all looking for, especially as mystics, is wanting to see and feel God in everything. And for some reason, this quote from I think it's from the Quran, or from the Hadith, is coming to me, and I'm really butchering this quotation. But he says something like, "We should worship God as if we see him in front of us, although we can't see him, but he sees us. And he always sees us." And, you know, I used to think about that and think about like, oh, he's watching us, you know, like Big Brother watching everything you're doing. But now, you know, I see it as he's witnessing us. He's always there. He's always holding us. And that feels really beautiful. It doesn't feel like, you know, someone's out there trying to catch you for doing something wrong. It feels like, wow, you're never alone. And that feels really beautiful to me.
Yeah, it's I when I work with people around these things, we talk a lot about what do you need your higher power and your God to be, and what do you need to undo, right? What do you need to no longer? And I just can't have this like really kind of mean guy. And I hold, you know, the mothering part, the feminine part of this idea of like, I deeply love my child, and I mean, you know, I get irritated and all, but like
we all do, yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's truth to that. But when he does something wrong, I don't think, see, bad. I just think, oh, honey, like that's why I told you not to do that, right? Like I love you. Don't touch the hot stove, and then he may do it again, and so I kind of see that the same way with my higher power, and it's this idea of like, oh, I love you. You don't have to do that. You don't have to lie. I see the fear that you know, the only time I lie is because I don't trust that I'm going to be taken care of.
Right.
Right. And this idea about seeing the God in everything, like, I don't know, you know, that's I don't know that I'll ever reach that. I like the idea of I'm either facing in that direction and walking towards that, or walking away from that.
Yeah.
And that allows me a little more humanity, and still goal, right? Like I still do want that. And I do want that not to be a good girl and go to heaven, which is deeply in my being. Like I could, to undo the good girl thing. But because I will be happier, joyous, and more free.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I love the way that you describe that as, you know, walking towards it or walking away. We have this other saying that's in the Quran a lot about being on the straight path or straying from the straight path. And again, I used to think of it as this, like you're either a believer or you're a disbeliever. You're either going to heaven or you're going to hell. This very binary kind of fear-based way of being in relationship to our spirituality and to God. And now I do see it much more in the way that you've described it. I'm either walking in the understanding that I'm held in love, or I'm walking alone, thinking I'm alone. I'm never actually alone, but thinking I'm alone, and therefore operating from this limited humanness, thinking that I have to do everything by myself, taking it all on, and then just being the flawed human that I am, right? And for me, getting back on that straight path isn't about getting back on doing all of the tick box things like a good girl, but it's turning back to face God and realizing, hey, I was always here. I'm always here. You can relax, you can drop all of that, and just come back and just surrender. And there's something, I used to have a really hard time with the word surrender. The word Islam itself means to submit or to surrender. And because of patriarchal conditioning, I really thought of that as, become this, it felt very shaming.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like something that was powerful.
Yeah.
And now it really does feel very powerful to be able to relax and say, I can't do this. Like, can you please take over here? I don't want to like carry the world on my shoulder. And there have been times, especially in the last year, where, I've been speaking a lot on tough subjects around race, around justice and inequality. And there have been times where my faith have been really tested. Where I felt like, what is the point in this? There's just too much to overcome. And in those moments, I realized when you can't carry it anymore, the only place you can turn is back to God. Because that's the only place where you'll find grace. It's the only place where you'll find the ability to be able to forgive, or to have patience, or to have compassion, or to just to call on higher attributes that are available to you in that moment. And so for me to be able to say, look, I don't know what to do. It's too hard. It's too much, and it's too painful. Tell me what to do, or just hold this for me, it's been the only place I can turn. There's no person in the world that can tell me what to do in those situations. And it's in those places that I've begun to learn just how important it is for me to have faith in a higher power beyond just human beings.
Yeah. I've witnessed a fraction of what you've gone through this year, and I don't know that I could do it, right? And I have deeply prayed for you, makes me tear, and I've held you from afar and rooted you on, and I think that experience, I mean, yours happened to be pretty public, and but that experience of hitting a rock bottom, an emotional, mental, physical, whatever bottom, where you're like, I can no longer do this, I need help, is to finding the space where that is actually providing you deep strength. Like, that's actually the beautiful, that's the harder thing to do. I don't know how the words fail in this arena so much.
I hear you, though.
You're the writer. Yeah. You're the poet.
I hear you, and that has been the saving grace of everything. is to know what it is to really need God.
Yes.
To really need a higher power, something infinite and limitless, because my patience isn't limitless, and my compassion isn't limitless, and there's been many times where I've had to say, I can't engage with certain people, I can't put myself in these situations because it's too painful and it's too hard, And it's in those moments that I have turned to God, and it's also in those moments that I've seen God working through people for me, on my behalf. Like you said, people praying for me from afar who I don't even know, have never connected with. People sending me PayPal donations, people sending gifts to my kids, and all manner of things. And that's God to me too. That's grace, and that's, I think, for so many. I'm not an activist. I'm a writer, but when I think about activists and the struggles that they are going through and have gone through historically, and I think about how did they keep on going in the face of all the hatred and the face of the brutality and the violence, and real violence, bodily, physical violence. How did they not just give up and say it's not worth it? How did they how did Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth say, we're going to keep working towards a future that we have never seen, but we believe is possible, and we don't even know if it's possible in our lifetime or the next coming lifetimes. We're still going to keep going. And for me, that's God, that gave them that strength and that grace and that courage to keep going. And I'm just doing a very fraction of that, very, very small, not even. And so it's astounding to me, and it's very beautiful to me. And that's very nourishing to me. And when I don't take the time to step back and allow myself to surrender to that and to sink into that, that's when I burn out, and that's when I become pessimistic and cynical. When I notice that that's happening, then I'm like, I need to step back here.
And that's holy too, right? I mean, that's the dance. Yeah. That's holy too. There are times which you get to speak your truth in such a way that then people get altered. And even if it's one person, it's still the work. Right. And that's the thing. Like, I have all these grand ideas, and I'm going to do this podcast, and everyone is going to explode in this, whatever. Right. And then I just relax and be like, I am being deeply, deeply affected and moved by this podcast every single time I do it.
Yes.
And maybe that's the only reason. And then there's one other person that called and said, oh my God, that was moving to me. Thank you. Right. And it doesn't, it's easy to like want to be that, the perfect this person that's going to do a big job. What I can tell you is that your work has changed my life. I wasn't going to go there, so we're not supposed to talk about this. So I can just tell you that is true for me, and also the watching you step back has been beautiful too, of like, yes, there you go. Yes, I need to step back. You do what you can. And I think I used to work in bereavement and in hospice, and when people were dying, and I would tell people that, and they were always kind of horrified by that. Like, oh my God, how do you do that work? And it was hard, right? It had a price. It had a deep price, but it wasn't too hard. Right? Like, it wasn't so hard that I couldn't keep going. And there was a lot of beauty in it, a lot of just magic and deep, deep magic in it. And so I think that if we all do our own personal work and keep showing up and stretching just a little outside of our range, then that's enough, right?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. And it's all hard. It's all hard, right? And so, in nourishment from is seeing how, for so many people who've done work that's important to them, whether they became, a cultural icon or not, right? What I have noticed is that having a deeply intimate relationship with a higher power, however they describe that, has been hugely influential and nourishing for them. And I have found that for myself as well, that it drives my purpose. My religion and what we believe in my faith around justice, around equality, around, standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, all of those kinds of things come from my religion, come from what I have been taught from a young age, and also come from my own intimate relationship with God. And so my purpose is driven by that, even when it becomes very, very hard. And then that stepping back is always a call inwards. It's always for me, I'll notice it when it no longer feels like I'm being of service. It feels like I'm just crapping on everyone, basically.
When my ego's engaged and I'm doing it and it's all about me and I've got an agenda.
Right. When it feels like, I truly believe that anger is holy and rage is holy, but when it feels like it's no longer that anymore, it's destruction, and the destruction has no purpose other than destruction. That's when I know I need to pull back and reassess and just rest and remember. And those quiet times are, I think, the most important times for me. I think without those times, I'm not able to write, not able to process, not able to be of service, really. And so that solitude and that time alone, and I'm thinking about, Prophet Muhammad and how he would go off into the caves by himself and meditate. And, this was before he received the message of Islam. And nobody knew why he was always going off into the caves by himself, and they thought it was so weird. And it was from that revelation came to him in the cave. And so solitude is a deeply spiritual practice, and I think it's so important for all of us.
Amen. We are totally over time, and but I want to continue to talk to you. So, okay. So maybe I'll have you back. Maybe we'll figure out some excuse. I don't know. More will be revealed. I do want to say thank you for taking the time out to telling us your experience and your vision and all of the ways in which you can support Layla, find Layla, read more about her. If this is what is calling to you, will be in the liner notes. I highly recommend becoming a patron of hers. Please feel free and called to go check you out. And I just thank you again for sharing so deeply and so honestly about your experience.
Thank you so much. And thank you for praying for me and for allowing my words to enter your heart. I'm just I'm being used, and I'm saying yes to my calling. And I'm grateful when I see others saying yes to their calling as well. So thank you.
You're welcome.